I'm happy to make it to the second edition, even though I missed the first. உண்மையில் நான் நேராக இங்கே ஏர்போர்ட்லேருந்து வரேன். ஏற்கனவே நேற்றும் மதுரையில் நிகழ்ச்சி, அப்புறம் திருத்தங்கலில் ஹாட்சன் சந்திரமோகன் நடத்துகிற அந்த ஸ்போர்ட்ஸ் அகாடமி ரொம்ப நாளாக போக வேண்டியிருந்தது. பல கல்யாணம் இருந்துச்சு. அதுலேயும் அதே போல் நேற்று யூனியன் பட்ஜெட் வந்ததுனால அதுக்கு சில பணிகளும் இருந்ததுனால் I have come totally unprepared. I don't know what I should say. But I'll just pick up where Mr. Swaminathan kind of laid the framework about what I would see as the changing nature of politics. அரசியல் களம் மிகவும் மாறிக்கொண்டே இருக்கிறது, மிக வேகமாக மாறிக்கொண்டிருக்கிறது. அதை பற்றி என் அனுபவத்தில், and my own experience, as you know, is very limited. This is my second term as an MLA, first term as a minister. I've hardly been here now close to 7 years. I think April 2016 was the first time I ever went as a political campaigner anywhere, at least for myself. I think when I was a boy, I've gone a couple of times for my father somewhere. But it has been a time of tremendous change. So in that sense, I think these 7 years, there's an old saying that change happens very discontinuously. There are decades when nothing happens, and then suddenly there are weeks when a lot happens. So in that sense, I would say these 7 years have been a period of great change. And I'll tell you some of the myths about politics first, and then I'll slowly start decomposing them as I have learnt in my experience, and start telling you some of the positives and maybe some tips that can help you if you're aspiring to have a career in elected public office in the future. So I think one of the core fallacies that most people assume in politics or in public debate is that things are what they seem. பேப்பரில் ஒரு ஆர்டிக்கலோ ஒரு தகவலோ வந்தால் அது முதல்ல உண்மையினும், ரெண்டாவது அது எந்த இன்டர்பிரிட்டேஷனில் இருக்கோ அதுதான் சரியான இன்டர்பிரிட்டேஷன் என்றதிலும். That's the default assumption. Maybe one day it was like that. But what I have come to understand, the first thing is I never either believe or react to any news, any article, any data point, any report, any statement. One of the great arts of politics is subterfuge, is either masking the real intent or masking the real policy or the real motive, or purposely putting out something that has relatively little meaning. So let's start with the kind of the yesterday's budget, right? There's all these headlines about this percentage, this number, that number, all these things. At the core of it, there were only 4 or 5 issues. Is this going to be greater capitalist and less socialist budget or not? Is it going to be fiscally prudent or not? Is it going to be more constrictive on the states or not? Is it going to be effective in either incentivizing growth and jobs or effective in containing inflation or effective in improving demand at the bottom of the pyramid that has fallen dramatically? I don't want to turn this into a political discussion because I think there'll be people of many views here. But the way I have framed these questions, how many people have actually covered the debate in that way? They'll say இது வந்து 5 லட்சத்துலேருந்து 7 லட்சம் ஆச்சு, இது வந்து 50% வளர்ந்தது, இது வந்து 20% குறைஞ்சது. Nobody is asking the core questions. What is it that a budget can actually do? I'm a finance minister. At the end of the day, the budget is the implementation in money terms of the philosophy on which my government came to power, my chief minister's government came to power, where we are all part of it. And the question is, does our allocation, does our prioritization, does our relative financing sources, relative uses of money, does it match the philosophy and the agenda with which we came to power? And directionally, if it is true, is it better or worse than last year, or is it likely to yield better or worse outcomes than last year? That's the real way of addressing a budget. But very few people really have that depth of understanding. So a lot of the debate, a lot of the noise, there'll be talking points given, everybody will come out with the same points. And at the core of it, a budget is nothing but a statement of intent. It is the intent of how I plan to use the fisc in pursuit of my political ideology or philosophy. If you look at what the real outcome is, that takes anywhere up to 2 years for you to know what has actually happened with the money in that period. So if you take the state of Tamil Nadu, and we're better than most, the fiscal year ends March 31st. Last February, that is 13 months before, I would have put out a budget with an intent of what should happen between the coming April 1st and the next March 31st. When I come this February or this March to the assembly, I will have something only called a revised estimate. Because of the way the system works, and it's a bit technical, things like cash versus accrual accounting, date of closing of accounts, date of validation from the AG's office and all that, the effective answer is that I may have at best 9 months worth of data, sometimes 8 months or 9.5 months, or in a really good scenario, 10 months worth of data, in which I'm going to project what I call the revised estimate. But when I give the revised estimate, almost nobody is focused on the revised estimate. They are focused on my intent for the next year. Very few people turn around and ask me, did you achieve what you said you were going to achieve in the year that is just concluding? Even that is not a final number, right? It's only a revised estimate. The true final account, again because of the nature of accounting AG's office, audited accounts versus unaudited, the true final accounts will appear sometime like September of the year after, 6 months after the year concluded. And depending on the cycle of the assembly, it will be publicly made available as late as the next budget. That is to say, the 22-23 accounts, I gave the budget in February or March of 22. I will give a revised estimate in February or March of 23, and I will give the final account of what happened in 22-23, maybe in February, March of 24. In some places it comes earlier, some places it comes later. How many people go and ask the question, what did you achieve back in 22-23 in the month of February 2024? Almost nobody. Everybody says, what are you going to do for 24-25? So, in some sense, the whole art of politics is a smoke and mirrors business. It's about projection, it's about kind of vision, it's about selling ideas or selling concepts. And very, very few people actually dig down to the core of it. What is it that you were supposed to achieve? Have you achieved it? How does this match what you say your policy is, and so forth? Now, I would say, at least in India today, there are only really two core approaches to politics. The one that in Tamil Nadu, we call it the Dravidian model, but generally in various forms, it is a socialist approach to politics. The socialist approach to politics says, make sure the people at the bottom of the pyramid are well taken care of. Make sure that they are all given equal paths to improvement, social upliftment, economic development, mostly through education, through leveling programs, through special grants, through reservations, etc. And try and build a more equitable society with a weighted average productivity that is high, starting with human capital at the core of your economic model. Then there's the more rightist philosophy that says actually what you got to do is build infrastructure, create good ease of doing business, support national champions, privatize as much as you can, and the people will get the benefit eventually. So you don't focus so much on social spending, you focus on the big picture things. If you look at the union government between 2014 and now, they have very clearly followed that philosophy. And that's a universal, I mean, it's all over the world, it's not unique to India. There's all over the world a right of center philosophy, there's all over the world a left of center philosophy. And that is best stated by the percentage of the budget allocated to social sector spending has dropped continuously, and the percentage of the budget allocated to infrastructure and markets and to kind of giving relief or incentives to industry or to the capital gains, etc., has kept on increasing. So we have two profoundly different models. And of course, nobody is black or white, right? Everything is a shade of gray. We have some, even I'd like to do some things that are more efficient and more market supportive. Sometimes I'm forced to do it because we're not able to execute as much as we'd like in the government. And whether you like it or not, even if you're a relatively right wing by philosophy government, in India today, you cannot actually win elections without doing some measure of social spending. So even the union government will at least appear to be doing more and more social spending. So at the heart, we ought to be talking about things that have profound implications based on a connecting of the dots between what is your philosophy, what is your ideology, how are you going to translate that into action through legislation, through allocation of money, through framing of schemes, through implementation of projects, and then actually look at outcomes and say, are you achieving the outcomes that you stated you were going to do, sometimes a year ago, sometimes 2 years ago? In my maiden speech in the assembly, I made a assessment, and Miss Jalta was then alive, but she was not in the assembly that day. She had did this very curious, what can I say, indulgence to me, that she came to the assembly, which she didn't come very often because she was not 100% well. But she didn't sit in the house. She went and sat upstairs in the chief minister's chamber and watched the speech on TV rather than being in the house. I always wondered why. And then much later I realized that if she had sat in the house, it would have given encouragement to a lot of people to keep on disrupting me and preventing me from speaking. And she didn't want to put me through that, so she went and sat upstairs. She could have stayed at home and watched it. They sent it to her. They sent the feed to her house anyway. But she came, and right when I finished speaking, somebody came down from the CM's office and said, Madam wants to have the papers that you were referring to when you were speaking. And so I said, sure. I mean, anyway, it's going to be in the transcript, but if you want it immediately, I'll give it to you immediately. That year, we didn't attend the finance minister's reply because the custom till that year had been that the debate started and the leader of the opposition spoke on the morning or to kick off the last day, and then the finance minister replied that same afternoon or right after that. But in the case of my good friend and predecessor, OPS, Mr. OPS, he couldn't afford that. He needed the time for the IS officers to write up his reply. And so he said, I can't reply the same day as the opposition. I'll only reply the next day. You have to finish this evening. Then somebody can write up my response. Then I'll only read it the next day. And so we protested against that and we boycotted. So my maiden speech was on a Monday, started off the debate. And then that Friday I was not there to listen. And then a reporter called me and he said, I've been covering the assembly 15, 20 years now. And I've never seen anything like this where the finance minister's reply, some 80% of his reply was answering only your points, the points you raised. Because one of the points I'd raised was, I said this same government with this same finance secretary and this same finance minister Up till 2014, you had a track record that your medium-term fiscal projection under the MTFP table, 1 year or 2 years forward, the 1 year forward projection, then the budget estimate, then the revised estimate, then the final account, all these, at least the gross numbers, that is total revenue, total expenditure, இதெல்லாம் 2%, 3% variation தான் இருக்கும். நீங்கள் எஸ்டிமேட் போட்டதுக்கும் பட்ஜெட் போட்டதுக்கும் ரிவைஸ்ட் எஸ்டிமேட்டுக்கு ஃபைனல் அக்கௌண்ட்டுக்கும். So that means you had some like capability, you had built some kind of professionalism in the department and you could do this. And sometimes it will be plus, sometimes it will be minus. So in theory, you might find that the projection and the budget was 3% delta in one direction, and by the time the final account came, it was delta in the other direction. So it actually went back and matched the actual projection. Phenomenal professionalism. I said, how is it by 16, 17? This number, now if I look back the last 2 years, the variation has become 20%, 30%, meaningless. நீங்கள் சொல்கிற எஸ்டிமேட்டுக்கும் நீங்கள் சொல்கிற பட்ஜெட்டுக்கும் நீங்கள் சொல்கிற ரிவைஸ் எஸ்டிமேட் சம்மந்தமே இல்லாமல் 10,000 20,000 கோடி வித்தியாசம் வருது. இதுக்கு என்ன பதில்னு கேட்டிருந்தேன். அதுக்கெல்லாம் பதில் சொல்லியிருந்தாங்க. Then I later discovered that madam had taken my thing, had heard people mark it up, so given it to the finance secretary and said, make sure you answer all his questions properly. I want to know the answers. அந்த அளவுக்கு ஒரு intellectual basis இருந்துச்சு politicsக்கு, even in that time, even on that day. In fact, that is true even today. If you leave the papers and you leave the propaganda and you leave the public speeches and all out, if I go to the GST Council or I go to the finance minister's meeting or I go to meet union finance ministers in Delhi, at the end of the day, their real values, real issues, real math prevails. பேசும்போது எல்லாத்துக்கும் தெரியுது யார் எந்த தயாரிப்போடு வந்திருக்காங்க, யாருடைய கருத்துக்கு என்ன மதிப்பு, எது செய்ய முடியும், எது செய்யலாம். And there I also would say relatively independent of politics. If you go with any reasonable proposal to most ministers in Delhi, they are reasonably accommodative of doing that. If you ask me, is the policy at the top conducive to states? I say no. It is the exact opposite of what then Chief Minister of Gujarat used to argue for federalism. The authoritarianism is exactly opposite of that. But if you ask me at an individual minister level or individual decision level, I would say that most people are reasonable human beings and we actually get some things done. So the second aspect of politics, I would say, is that most politicians have some kind of talent. Some of it may be academic, some of it may be people connect, some of it may be just through experience. The other day, UP Finance Minister was at my house for a quick meeting and he brought 2 other ministers with him. Backward classes and excise. UP Finance Minister is a 9-time MLA. Backward class minister is a 5 or 6-time MLA. Before him, 3 or 4 times, his father was MLA. Now, I'm not saying Varis Arasiyal, but I'm just pointing out that because of this depth of experience, the ability to gauge who is who, which idea actually is a valid or workable idea, which is likely to have successful outcomes, idalam, a lot of politicians have grounding in that. They know what is what and who is who. I would say that the general camaraderie and mutual respect in Tamil Nadu has gone up a lot between political parties, at least DMK and ADMK in the last few years. But that kind of fear has fallen away now. In fact, when I was an opposition MLA, then Chief Minister, now leader of the opposition, I went to see the speaker for something and he complimented me. He said, "Neenga eppalam pesreengo romba Thalaiva karuthodu pesreenga." I said, "Nandri." So, this kind of internal discussion, I think, is a good sign in a democracy, and it's becoming more so. So, as adversarial as it may seem on paper, in fact, on operating level, inside Parliament, inside, inside the building, but not in the glare of the TV cameras, things are actually quite conducive, and people are very willing to work with each other. The third thing I would say is that the model of politics is changing dramatically. There used to be a day, if you look at the rise of the Dravidian movement, it was through Thinnai Pracharam and it was through captivating the young people. It was through the Manavarani, the Ilangirani. That's where the Dravidian ideology grew. And I'm saying before there was a DMK, ADMK and all that, when there was one whole Dravidian movement. And it was based on people who were being discriminated against, understanding that they were being discriminated against, and basically standing up for their rights and putting their vote in the ballot box to match that. Since 1967, some self-professed Dravidian party has always formed the government of Tamil Nadu. That is not a coincidence. It is because there was an alignment between the interests of the majority of the people and the ideology of these parties. Again, I don't want to get into politics, so I'm not going to go much deeper than that. But what I'm going to say is that going back to the Justice Party of 1920 election, or in fact the foundation of the South Indian Liberal Federation in 1916, the ideology was very clear that you must run politics because you are for something, not because you are against something. There's not a long road to have by being against something as your core ideology. So the social justice, the inclusion, the education for all has turned out to be such a winning ideology that it has persisted for a long time. And in fact, even those 30 years or so, between 37 and 67, some part of which there was no government because there was no election because of the Second World War and Indian protests against it and so forth. But even the part of those 30 years that was a non-Justice Party, non-Dravidian, non-DMK, non-ADMK government, the ideology of the Congress of the Swatantra parties that ran the government that got elected to office with a majority in what was once Madras Presidency, then Madras State, then divided Madras State after the partition of Andhra, and then Tamil Nadu, actually hewed much more closely to the Dravidian ideology than it did to the Congress of the rest of the country. And this was first pointed out to me by none other than former West Bengal Governor Thiru Gopal Krishna Gandhi, who is the grandson of Rajaji, in addition to being the grandson of Annal Gandhi. And he explained many of the policies that the Madras Presidency, Congress and Swatantra governments had taken, and how closely they hewed to the Dravidian ideology and not to the Congress of, let's say, Delhi Presidency in those days. In that sense, I also think that while there are many paths to success in politics, if you want long-term success, you better have a clear ideology and you better stick to one ideology. Though people can buy and sell and jump and change, I think those are all short-term successes that could easily turn out to be shorter lived than one would think. It's changing. What do I mean by it's changing? These days, there's a stark difference between North India, what I would consider kind of the Hindi belt, and South India. The primary difference being that in North India, because of relatively lower education levels and because of relatively lower economic progress and relatively lower penetration of technology, you can control the message and the campaign is still in the traditional ways. That is, the two traditional ways: on the ground work, not necessarily by the candidate, but the party mechanism, and through TV and print, right, which is the traditional radio, TV, and print. This myth that somehow social media dictates elections is completely wrong in two levels. First, that's certainly not true for North India. It is true to some extent in South India, but that's only at the macro voting level. At the micro level, if I want to stand for MLA and win, I cannot do it without going to every street and every house in my constituency. I could be the king of social media, it doesn't help. In my constituency, I got to be seen as Mr. Local, Mr. Accessible, Mr. Caring, that I did for them what I said I was going to do, and they have access to me, and I attend all their weddings and graha pravesams and kadakuttus and even in grief funerals. So it is a completely different model in the South. In the South, though, things are changing dramatically. First of all, uh, the impact of social media is much, much, much higher than most people realize. And by social media, I don't mean Twitter and Facebook and all that. We are not yet at a level of digitalization of our lives or data ubiquity where you can do targeted campaigning through such platforms. If you're in the US or UK, they know everything about you, right? They know which airline you fly, they know which grocery store you shop, they know how many boxes of cereal of which brand you buy, they know what you eat in the morning, they know what you eat in the evening. They can tailor a message to you based on what their profile categorization of viewers. We don't yet have that much data, and maybe we never will, hopefully, on any individual. So here, we only use social media as a kind of macro communication strategy, and by far the most powerful media in the world, by far, by a factor of 10, is YouTube. YouTube is everywhere. YouTube is on every phone that is sold practically because Android is by far the operating system in India, and YouTube comes installed. And even unlike WhatsApp, you don't need an account to use YouTube. You may need an account to go and give comments and all that. Most people don't care. But to watch, you need nothing. You just need a phone and a cheap data connection, which everybody has. So, really, the power of communication today rests in YouTube. And with one good YouTube video, you can achieve the outcome of running, 3 big mega rallies in 3 different places in Tamil Nadu. Those look good for TV. You'll have tens of thousands of people, big lights, big cutouts, and all that. Whether that translates into votes, so far I'm not sure. I think the voting pattern is very, very, very different. Just like I say, what you read in the news and what's really happening may not be very close to each other. What you see in the rallies and what you see in the votes may not be very close to each other. The voting pattern is incredibly sophisticated. I mean, it's hard for me to overemphasize. The average voter is very, very, very thoughtful, nuanced, and aware of their self interest, and they vote accordingly. Whatever you think, there is no guaranteed sway. Of course, there are macro trends, right? Macro trends, I would say, are most helpful in an MP election because the average electorate in Tamil Nadu is about 1.5 million people, 15 lakh people. Yara candidate nirthnalum is not realistic that that candidate can capture the imagination of a significant portion of those 15 lakh people. Very, very rare. So the macro trends, the party, the philosophy, the disgruntlement or the happiness with the outcome, the pro-incumbency or the anti-incumbency, these things can drive the broader, and these can be greatly influenced by social media. You come down to the MLA election level, and this is probably half and half. It depends on the candidate. In some places, the candidate is very important, maybe up to half the vote. In some cases, the candidate is just another representative of the party. The macro trend will determine the outcome. For the last election, for the first time in Tamil Nadu, we saw a great regional split. We have never seen that kind of split before, where we saw one region lean heavily towards one coalition and the rest of the state lean very, very heavily towards another coalition. That kind of regional split we have never seen before. It has usually been a universal kind of trend across Tamil Nadu. Whether that's a one off or it portends something, it's hard for me to say, but things are changing. I do a lot of analysis of data, incredibly detailed, at least certainly that I had not seen when I came in 2016. As you may know, for a while I established and ran the IT wing of the DMK party. So I also have some experience and some background based on that experience. I would say that every election is a different election. I'll just give you one example. In my constituency, Madurai Central, I'm just going to compare 2011 MLA election, 2011 local body election, 2014 MP election, 2016 MLA election, 2019 MP election, 2021 MLA election, and 2022 local body election. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8 elections. Just look at the dramatic changes in the voting pattern. 2011, we lost Madurai Central badly, as we did in much of the state, and we lost all 10 constituencies in Madurai district. So there was nothing much to write home about. It was worse than the average, but I mean, some have to be better, some have to be worse. There was nothing dramatic to write about in Madurai Central's 2011 MLA loss. But the 2011 local body elections dealt us a body blow. That time, I think we had 21 or 22 wards out of the 100 in my constituency, and we didn't have a single councillor. There, we really realized it was granular and down to every. Because you see, I stopped at MLA. The place where the candidate matters the most is the local body election, because the average councillor's vote list, voting population, or eligible voting population is a few thousand people, except Chennai. Chennai is almost like a mini MLA election because you got 40-50,000 voters. But if you go to any other part of Tamil Nadu, particularly if you go into the rural areas, or even the other cities like Coimbatore, Trichy, Madurai and all that, average councillor is elected by a eligible voting population of around 10,000 people or less. Is very local. And so it makes a big difference who the individual is. If you see, there are still independents being elected councillor because you can build that kind of rapport with the people when your electorate is only that small. In fact, I'll go the reverse. If all of you want to get into elected office, the easiest and the best and the fastest way is to stand for councillor. For councillor, you don't need anything. If you have a good rapport, if you spend 2-3 years working on that area, if you have built your relationship with that community, in my constituency, let's say the average councillor has 20 streets or 30 streets, and maybe 1,500 houses. If you have built your relationship with that constituency, they will vote for you independent of everything else. So this is the spectrum of elections. Now I'm saying go back to my original comparison. 2011 lost the MLA, lost the local bodies even more miserably. 2014, again, DMK lost almost, not almost, every single seat we lost. Madurai also was a loss. The loss was probably worse than average. Not big difference, but we lost Madurai Central by 25,000 votes or something like that. 2016, there should have been a local body election, but for various reasons it never ran. So 2016 MLA election, I go and stand, and 2016 MLA election, first time candidate, I couldn't speak Tamil on public stages, so I never spoke at all. I didn't want to make any commitment that I couldn't honor, and I didn't know what I could or couldn't honor because I had not been in office before, so I didn't make any local campaign promise at all, other than the party's manifesto. I didn't make any campaign promise. And, I don't want to talk about other things because it may be taken politically, but I can say that I didn't pay any money. And yet I won by about 4% of the vote, about 6,000 votes, 5,800 something votes. At a time when only 2 constituencies of the 10 in Madurai won, and across the state we lost the popular vote by about 1% or something. So I was about a 5% delta to the state average. 2019 rolls around and it turns out to be a huge wave for various reasons. I don't want to get into that again. But such a wave that what I thought was going to be a 8.5% victory as a core prediction turned out to be a 22% or 21.67% victory for our coalition. It was just a sweep. seats that we thought were kind of on the edge, we won by 2 lakh votes. MP seats, I'm saying. But in my constituency, again, of the 6 MLA constituencies in my MP constituency, that is where I'm a voter, my Madurai Central MLA constituency had the highest vote share for the DMK coalition, which was not even a DMK candidate, it was a CPM candidate, first time candidate, had stood and lost at MLA before, but had never even been elected councillor before. So, first time big office candidate, CPM. But of the 6 constituencies, we had the greatest vote share in for the DMK and the greatest margin of victory for the DMK in my constituency. That was not true in 2011 and 16, right? I'm talking 2019 now. 2016, of the 2 that won, I only won by 3.8 or 4%. Then the MLA elections came around in 2021. This time, around the state, we won by about 7-8%. I don't remember. But in my constituency, again, I didn't give money. But this time, I was now going for the third election. I'd gone 16, I'd gone campaigning in 19 for some days. I went in 21 for myself. And this time, I won by 34,000 something votes, or 23%. Again, it was very, very high margin of victory. But just watch the trend. It's from minus to flat to plus to higher to higher. And then 22, we had the local body elections. And I had a serious problem. I had already gone to court saying that the redistricting of the wards was done very, very one sidedly, and that my constituency had lost 6 councillors out of 22 because the average voting population in my constituency had gone to 15,000, whereas in my neighbor's constituency, my friend Sellu Raju of the ADMK, he had gone from 15 to 21 wards, and he on average had only 10,000 voters. It was a completely rigged, redistricting. I had gone to court as an MLA against it. Court said, we won't stay it. When the notification comes, you come and ask us. At that time, we'll stay it. Right now, we can't stay something that has not gone into effect because the redistricting would only go into effect on the date of the notification of the election. Because if you go from 22 to 16, you have that many less candidate opportunities for your party. And all politics is local, right? Very few people are that altruistic that they'll say, no, you're MLA, I don't care if I'm councillor or not. So first you have to kind of manage all the expectations inside. Then there's the whole coalition dharma. I worry I'll run out of time, so I'll close this up in 2 minutes. The net result is, of the 16, very unique to the DMK, we gave 3 of the 16 after being cut down from 22 to 16 to coalition partners. One of those didn't even get their papers in properly, so we had to run one person as an independent. And in the end, we won all 16, and we won all 16 very comfortably. One independent, 2 coalition partners, and 13 down from 22. Now I'm telling you, that's what political strength and success is. Everything else is show. You deliver victories. That is the only basis for saying whether somebody is a good politician or not. Now, I say I deliver victories because I build relationships, I deliver progress, I deliver outcomes, I keep my word. Therefore, I show better and better and better outcomes. Maybe that's true. Maybe there are other ways of doing it. Maybe money works. I can't tell. I haven't tried it. But this notion that somehow just because you have a large organization, or you hold large rallies, or you put a lot of posters and flags, therefore you are a strong man or powerful, is a completely bogus. It may have been true on one day, I don't know. Today, it has nothing to do with electoral outcomes. If you are smart politicians, you focus on the outcome that matters to you. Why are we in public life? We are in public life because we have a philosophy or a view of how the world ought to work, how society ought to be shaped, how it needs to progress. In our case, it is a more leftist, socialist, what we call uniquely a Dravidian social justice, inclusion, education view. We come to politics because we want to be elected to office so that we can create the laws and the schemes and the money allocation to propagate that view. That means the core of success is to get elected to government. And if the core of success is to get elected to government, then surely the measure of an individual's progress in politics is, can you deliver the vote, either for yourself or for your coalition partner or for your councillor candidate? can you deliver the vote? Have you built that relationship with your voter base? And why I say every election is different is if I look at the 2019 election and the 2021 election, on the surface they were very similar. 2,40,000 or so registered voters, 1,50,000 came out to vote. Then you say, oh, that means it's the same kind of outcome. But at the state level, it wasn't. It went from a 22.6% victory or 21.6% victory to an 8% victory. Something changed dramatically. Then I go and look at my voter turnout and I realize out of 1,50,000 people, 30,000 people were different. Just think about what I'm saying. 30,000 people who came to vote in 2019 did not come to vote in 2021, and hence roughly 30,000 new people who did not vote in 19 came and voted in 21 to arrive at the same aggregate of 1,50,000 or so. There are many reasons why people don't come, right? Some of them have moved away. We can see their voter ID somewhere else in Tamil Nadu. Some people have passed away. We see them in the death record. Some people have just stayed home and not come to vote. That's a large number, like 18, 20,000. Then you say, who are the new voters? Some people have moved into town. Their voter ID used to be somewhere else and now it's here. Some people are 18, 19-year-old people who didn't have the eligibility to vote in 19 are voting now. But then there's a large contingent, 15, 17,000 people who were in Madurai Central, who had a registered vote, who did not choose to come and vote in 19, who came and chose to vote in 21. If 30,000 people, that is 20% of the turnout, is different between two elections less than 2 years apart, what does any kind of sequential analysis really tell you? Tells you nothing. Because the margin of victory in most elections is 5%, 7%, 3%, 1%, 8%. 20% of the voters are different. So, really, at the end of the day, this old British adage or English adage that says people vote with their feet is the core takeaway from this. People very rarely come and press button A in this election and button B or Sinnam B in the next election. What happens is either they got to be enthused enough to come out and vote, or they got to be disgusted enough to come and vote against. These are the two driving factors of voting patterns. And it is not at all clear to me that the old yardsticks of, print media, TV, big gatherings, big flexes, big shows of strength and all that has any real correlation to this. I think we are going into our own version of micro-targeting. The more we know our neighborhoods, the more we know our communities, the more we know their needs, the more we build rapport with them and relationships with them. That is the basis for electoral progress. And so I think if I were to conclude, there's probably a macro strategy and a micro strategy. Right? A macro strategy is to have consistency of policy, consistency of views, consistency of communication models. Ironically, most governments don't communicate nearly as well as political parties. Even the same political party, the amount of attention it spends on communication during an election, when it sits in office, it just drops off. Very rare exceptions. The party in government in Delhi is probably the rarest and most successful propaganda and communications government in the history of India. But most governments are not that sophisticated. I'm not saying it, but I'm saying they are smart. They know what they're doing. And therefore, I think there has to be a good macro strategy if you want to be successful at the level of a party or a movement or a large organization. But increasingly, the relative weightage of that is going down. And this micro strategy of communication, of connectivity, of social media, of individual touch is increasing. And I think, therefore, I said this back in 2018 in a podcast that was released, and I say it again. The need for a large organization or a base, or that you will only be successful if you have one of the major parties as your platform, I think is declining. It's declining all over the world. for good and bad reasons. I was speaking to somebody who's a successful junior minister in one of the Australian states, and he was saying in Australia it used to be 40% right, 40% left, 20% undecideds that would determine the election. He says at best is 30% left, 30% right now, and the 40% swing is what really determines the elections. And that's why they have this, the federal government in Australia, they call it a teal coalition or a purple coalition because it's got, all these different kinds of voting patterns in it. It's not liberal, it's not labor, it's some mix in the middle, a lot of independents, greens, etc. That is happening everywhere. It's happening around the world. It's not just for us. But Tamil Nadu is probably closer to the global progress norm because we are an advanced state, because we have more per capita income, because we have higher education levels, because we have greater penetration of technology than, let's say, states in the Hindi belt. So in that sense, I would say, now is as good a time as has ever been if you want to look at Mr. Swaminathan's statement, படித்தவங்க எதுவும் பேக்ரவுண்டில் அவங்க அரசியலுக்கு வந்து பொது வாழ்க்கைக்கு வந்து மக்களுடைய ஆதரவு பெற்று தேர்ந்தெடுக்கப்பட்டு பணியாற்றணும் என்றால் then the time has never been better than now. And it will probably keep getting better. How fast is the question? My own guess is faster than most people think. So I would say for those who have the dedication and the staying power, the time is good for you. Thank you.